Welcome back to the 1-0 podcast. I'm Lexi Linderman.
I'm Will Horseman.
Today we are joined by special guest Landon Tengwall, who hosts his own podcast, Behind the Wall with Landon Tengwall. He's a former offensive lineman for Penn State. How are you doing today, Landon?
Good, Lexi. Thank you for having me. I appreciate it, guys.
Oh, of course. Today we'll just kind of talk about some storylines as fall camp gets underway and get your opinion on where you think Penn State's going to end up at the end of this season. So we'll just start off. What are some of the storylines you're looking for at fall camp?
Yeah, I think obviously the number one coming in everybody's talking about is the wide receivers. And obviously went out in the transfer portal, got Trevor Pena, Kyron Hudson, Devontae Ross, and now it's like, hey, can we finally hit on a transfer portal wide receiver? And I think that's a big conversation because if you look back, we have taken 5 transfer portal wide receivers in the transfer portal era, really since like the 2021 happened. And only one of them has been a hit, in my opinion. Mitchell Tinsley is the only really success we saw. Julian Fleming came here, had a very vital role in the USC game, but outside of that, really nothing. We got nothing from Dante Cephas, really nothing from Malik McClain. It was kind of a bunch of misses. So the other piece that I think no one's really talking about too is it's unlikely, it's very wishful thinking that all 3 are going to be hits. So look where else in the room. Look at Big Ten Media Day. Drew Aller said, hey, Kobe Howard is going to play this year. And when Drew said that, I don't think he meant he's going to play against FIU, where everybody's going to play against FIU. I think he meant he's going to play meaningful snaps. So look around there. Tyseer Denmark has not been talked about that much. So I think not only those 3 transfers, but also just looking beyond that, some younger guys, like who can step up there. Something that's obviously interesting, the storyline. I think we know how good the running game is going to be this year, but Katron Allen and Nick Singleton sit at 10 and 11 all-time on the all-time rushing list here at Penn State. So that's going to be, I feel like, kind of the cool thing to track throughout the year and something the fans can kind of just cheer on. I believe off the top, I think Nick is 1,022 and Katron's like 1,055, something like that. Yeah, right around there. So it's very doable. They both rushed for more than that last year. So I guess the kind of question is how deep we will go into the season with that. And then I think one of the other big topics is Jim Nolls and how are we going to adjust? How, in year one, in a complex defense, we've heard from Ohio State fans how difficult they say this defense is to grasp. I think a piece of that is when Jim Nolls first got there, their defense wasn't as good as it is now. But at the same time, he does like to bring complex blitzes and mix around the coverages, and he really likes using 3 safeties. So kind of adjusting to that of how quickly can our guys get comfortable. And he even just talked about this a couple weeks ago, is Dani Dennis Sutton, Zane Durant, Zion Tracy, King Mack. There was a ton of guys that really didn't do spring ball. They were banged up. They kind of let them rest, that type of thing. And it was a long season. But that was kind of vital to that spring ball, the guys that got to do spring ball and get live reps in Jim Nolls' defense. I think it can't be understated how important that is to get those live reps. So this camp right now that's going on is uber important because a lot of these guys haven't actually played, like physically put on the pads and played in Jim Nolls' defense. You can do as many walkthroughs and watch as much tape as you want, but until you actually get on the field and do it, it's kind of hard to say, hey, we're in a really good place. So I think that's kind of another storyline. And then I'd be looking at, Drew Aller. That's a big conversation after Notre Dame's game. It was statistically and just overall Drew Aller's worst game of his career. Now, he had some great games. You look at the Oregon game, the Boise State. His stat line didn't necessarily say it, but he had a really good game against Boise State. My biggest question for Drew is how can he change to really be that emotional leader? Think back to Sean Clifford and how everybody saw how Sean Clifford was. He would, cry, scream. He was letting all the emotions out, and it meant something to the team. Like that Rose Bowl team in 22, being on that, it was some of the greatest leadership I've ever seen, and that was headlined by Sean. And so it's like, hey, can we get some of that out of Drew? We saw West Virginia last year where he trucks someone, gets up, and yells in his face. Can we get back to that and have that be able to, depend on that, I think, throughout. Because we know Nick Dawkins. We know Dom DeLuca. We know Zakie Wheatley, Zane Durant. We know Dani Dennis Sutton's going to be animated as all heck. Can we get that out of Drew Aller is the biggest question for me. I think we know what he is talent-wise. And then, kind of just those big games. Oregon, Ohio State, and then into the playoffs. It feels like, up to this point, in any of his big games, he hasn't necessarily shown all the way up. And then I think you can kind of say something similar to that effect, looking at just James Franklin, his career at Penn State. We've all heard it. He knows what, people have been saying. And you look at it, I mean, Penn State in the James Franklin era has only won 3 games where they were the underdogs. So very rarely has he won games he's not supposed to. Now, you got to give James Franklin his credit. He doesn't lose games that he's not supposed to lose. The only one, I think, really in a long time was Illinois in 2021. So it hasn't happened in a long time. But the last time we won games that we weren't supposed to win, it was 2 in 2016, Ohio State, and obviously that we still see the highlights to this day. Hopefully we can get some new Ohio State highlights soon. And then Wisconsin in the Big Ten Championship. And the third one was the 2014 Pinstripe Bowl, James Franklin's first year. So it's been a long time to where Penn State has beaten an elite opponent. And we got 2 of them. I mean, we're looking at the possibility of a top 5 matchup against Oregon in the whiteout, which has never happened in whiteout history. And then the possibility if Ohio State beats Texas in week 1 and we handle Oregon, we're looking at a possible 1 versus 2 in Columbus in week 10, the day after Halloween. So some fun storylines out there for sure.
Yeah, you say the Oregon whiteout game is. I think that's going to be a very important game for Drew Howard because I think really like one of the big like knacks against Drew is that he doesn't really have a win against a truly elite top tier opponent. I mean, Boise State, SMU have playoff wins; those are big games, top 10 opponents. But he kind of lacks. He just yet to beat Ohio State. He hasn't beaten Michigan. He had a chance against Notre Dame. He kind of played, like you said, as one of his worst games of his career. But if the Oregon game is really, he has like 3 like games that should be completely easy, a bye week, and then it's probably the most important game of his career to this point.
Yeah, I think you're right on that. I mean, it is, and I think he's gonna feel that pressure. He knows he needs to perform in that game against Oregon. Now, I think kind of the good part about this year, looking at those big games, Oregon and Ohio State, this is the first time that Penn State is the more talented team. I mean, up to this point, I can even speak from when I was on the squad, when we'd play Michigan, when we'd play Ohio State, and it felt like we were just 1 play away. I mean, even in 2017 and 2018, I mean, back-to-back 1-point losses against Ohio State. And it always felt like they just had a couple players that just made that play, that were just a little bit better. And I think this is the first year in a long time where we have a top 5 quarterback in all of college football. We have the best running back duo. We have an offensive line that is thought to be one of the best in college football, and a defense that maybe, is missing, a few guys. Obviously, Abdul Carter's gone, but you still got Denai Dennis Sutton, Zane Durant. Both could be some of the best players in college football. Mind you, Zakee Wheatley as well, just a turnover machine. And then I think Tony Rojas is going to take a huge step forward as well. Played injured all of last year, got the injury fixed, missed all of spring ball. So another guy, I actually left his name out earlier, that didn't get to play in Jim Knowles' defense, but another guy you're getting back. So for me, this is the first time that we are the guys. And Nick Dawkins said this best. I had him on my show a couple weeks ago. And he said, I'm kind of looking around, and we were always the team that was out there trying to hunt, trying to get those top dogs and get them down. And he said, I look around now, and it's kind of like, are we being hunted now? Like, are we the top dogs? And that's kind of the feeling. So it's almost a little bit of a switch where, we're going to be favored, barring anything crazy happening. We're going to be favored against Oregon, who knows exactly what will happen. Ohio State, that's over 10 weeks into the season, so we'll see kind of how that unfolds. But I think the other big piece of it too is we got bye weeks before both games. And so that allows you, from a player standpoint, there's so much going on every week. You come in Sunday, you're still watching that Saturday game. You come in Monday, and that's the players' off day. That's our one mandatory off day that we get per week. And so you're not allowed to talk to the coaches on that day. So Tuesday's the first day you can really start preparing for the game that week. So, if you play Iowa the week before and then you go straight to Ohio State, you only have Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and it's time for Ohio State. Now you add in the fact that you have a bye week, and that really changes things. You go from, hey, we studied Ohio State, and we're going to implement these 3 plays to try to, really attack things that we saw on film. And that's all you can do because you only have 3 days. But when you have 12 days, now it's like, hey, we want to implement like 6, 7, 8 plays and kind of really tailor some of the, pieces of our defense and offense to specifically attack what the opponent is trying to do. So just having those bye weeks are really nice. We'll note that James Franklin's record off of a bye, I believe, is like 5-7, so it's not good. But I'm not one of those people that necessarily, like when ESPN throws out those stats where it's like, oh, when this happens, then this person is, this record. I don't necessarily think things in the past are going to affect the future. A lot of those games I'm sure he lost were against Ohio State and Michigan off of a bye. But look, I mean, it's never been more favorable. Penn State is the third easiest schedule in the Big Ten. Only people that have easier schedules are Indiana and Maryland. And if you kind of look back these past couple years, Ohio State last year had like the second easiest schedule in the Big Ten. Michigan the year before that had like the third easiest. And then Michigan again the year before that had the fourth easiest. So it's kind of a continuation of like, hey, if you have that easier Big Ten gauntlet, well, you're in a good place. And especially now with the expanded Big Ten, you can get a bad draw. There's a couple teams out there that just have a gauntlet to go through. I'm trying to think. It's not Indiana.
Wisconsin.
Wisconsin. It's Wisconsin.
Yeah.
Wisconsin.
Rutgers in November.
Yeah. Oh, it's a brutal schedule. I mean, it's like you just get a bad draw and you're just playing all the top teams. Well, Penn State, it's pretty good. Only, when you only have Ohio State and Oregon, that's not too bad. And I think an Oregon team that is kind of coming off a little bit of a rebuild. Both teams have new quarterbacks, so you're in a pretty good situation if you're Penn State. And I think outside of those two games, I mean, you do have at Iowa, and I think people are looking at that as a little bit of a trap game. And if we can talk about trap games for a second. But I feel like it's going to be so talked about, it actually can't be a trap game. Like a trap game is when 2021 we came off of I forget who we played before. We come in and that's Iowa and they were 3 and we were 4. So it wasn't necessarily a trap game, but we were so much better than them. And I'll never forget, that was the loudest thing I've ever heard in my life when Taquan Roberson had like back-to-back false starts, and then we fumbled the snap, and it was just pandemonium. And then they rushed the field, even though they were rated higher than us. And I'll never forget that feeling. And this is the first time we'll be back in Kinnick Stadium. So that's going to be something to monitor. We obviously go to UCLA. I think anytime you do that is, something that's going to be after Oregon. So the week after, hopefully an emotional win. And then you have to go to the West Coast, where it felt like when we went to the West Coast last year, it didn't even feel like we were playing a game because all of the talk was about the State College Airport runway, which was like, it was pretty amazing. That was like the number one story in the week, where Penn State ended up having kind of one of the most interesting games in recent memory against USC. So, there's that. And there's a couple other. You got Matt Rule returning to town with Nebraska, Dylan Raiola. Matt Rule was a coach here back, in the late 90s, 2000s. So him coming back with a potentially explosive offense. So there's a couple of trap games out there for Penn State that we just have to be careful. But, I mean, it's kind of now or never. Like, if it's not now, when is it? Because you start to look around and it's like, after this year, you lose a lot. I mean, we're talking almost the entire O-line, quarterback, running backs. Kind of look around. I mean, you lose Zane, Denai, Zaki, all of that. And then you think about it, Andy Kotelnicki was about this close to taking the West Virginia head coaching job, so he's probably gone. You start to look at other position coaches. Poindexter's been very close to taking defensive coordinator jobs. There's a ton of different. I mean, Coach Trout's been one of the best offensive line coaches in football for a long time. I think the NFL might be lurking for some of these position coaches as well. And it's a lot more lucrative deal because you don't have to spend the offseason worrying about trying to recruit 16-year-old kids. You get to actually just go on vacation with your family when you're an NFL coach. So, I mean, I think there's a lot of that of, what is next year going to look like for Penn State? So it even drives home even further, if not now, when.
Exactly. And I think you mentioned a good point. James Franklin said at Big Ten Media Days, this is the best personnel overall that he thinks he's ever had. I mean, you mentioned all the position coaches, all the guys that are leaving after this year. It just seems like it's natty or bust. And I want to go back to what you said about Oregon and Ohio State kind of having a little bit of a rebuild, but not like too bad. Obviously, they always recruit very well. But you get Oregon in their very first real game of the season. It's also the same for Penn State, obviously, but Dante Moore hasn't really had that experience. I mean, he's going into a whiteout at Beaver Stadium. That's a no-joke atmosphere, obviously. So they really get Oregon at a very good time, especially when they need a win against them really bad. Drew Allar needs to win against them really bad, like we said. And so I think they are in a good spot for that, because if you lose to both Oregon and Ohio State, they're still going to make the playoff likely, but you're looking at one of the very low seeds. You might be on the road, something like that. So they're very lucky they get Oregon very early when Dante Moore doesn't have that experience under his belt. Ohio State, obviously a different story because it's later in the season. Their quarterback's going to have more experience then, and it's on the road, obviously. But I think it's good for Penn State that they get Oregon early. I think it's a matchup they should win. We'll see, if they do. And obviously, we talked about James Franklin's record in big games, Drew Aller's record in big games, everything like that. But Drew Aller played really well against Oregon last year, despite the loss. He played really well. It was one of his best games of the season. He had an insane touchdown to, I think it was Omari Evans in the end zone. That was when he was being pulled. I mean, he can make really good plays. And I think I said this last week, but it's really interesting to me that obviously the Orange Bowl interception, everyone was talking about it. And it feels like almost a month later, everyone's like, oh, Drew Aller is like a top 5 quarterback after they were like completely just dogging on him after that Orange Bowl interception. So I think it's really interesting to see that turnaround. I think now the expectations are just so high for Drew, which I think he's always had that. He was a former 5-star. Penn State fans thought he was, the quarterback that was going to lead them over the hump to that national championship. He's been as advertised, but like not necessarily in those big games. He's made some really great plays that fans thought he had the potential to make, and he has that potential. It's just he needs to fully unlock it. And with the emotions too, I think he is an emotional guy. I mean, he was crying after the Ohio State loss in his first year as a starter. He was throwing iPads at Wisconsin this past year. I mean, he's been emotional. It's just I don't think he's maybe going about it in the right way, where it's not like firing up the team. It's more him being emotional with himself instead of like trying to help everyone else. So I think that's a really good point. He needs to really channel that to be a leader. But looking at the rest of the schedule, you mentioned the trap games. I wrote a story on that earlier this summer. I put Iowa, UCLA, and Nebraska. I think with UCLA just coming off the Oregon game, there could be some hangover. Traveling West Coast is never easy. So I think that's really interesting one, especially now that they have Nico. I'm not even going to try to pronounce his last name. Obviously, but UCLA's roster is it's not that good. I think Nico can only do so much. So I think they should be fine in that regard. But I think it's really interesting because you look at, they have Oregon, Ohio State on their schedule, but they still have the 3rd easiest schedule in the Big Ten. It's really interesting that that's the case. And so I think it's just really favorable for Penn State moving forward. Do you, though, think that James Franklin can get over this hump? When playoff, if they make the playoff, obviously, which they should. If playoff comes calling, how do you think James Franklin, is he really going to get over that hump?
Yeah, I mean, look, like I said, once again, this is the first year where it feels like there's no excuses. There's no, we don't have the support. There's no, don't have the coaches or don't have the star quarterback. It really is everything. And I think what really cemented that for Penn State fans is when we got Jim Nolls, it was like, okay, we are all in on this year. And now, and I think Franklin knows this, when he got Jim Nolls, it was cementing it's natty or bust. I don't think there's no way you go out and get Jim Nolls in a year where you make sure you shovel out a lot of money to make sure your core guys, Drew Aller, Kaytron Allen, Nick Singleton, Denai Dennis Sutton, Zane Durant, and Zakee Wheatley, you make sure all of those guys come back, pay them very handsomely, and then you go out and you pay someone $3.1 million a year, the highest ever for a defensive coordinator. That's kind of the expectation. So you go into those games and, with straight seeding in the playoffs this year, it's probably a little less likely we'd get something like, an SMU and then Boise State run out. So we're going to have to play some real games. I kind of cross that bridge when we come to it to a degree. I mean, do I think he can get it done? Yes, because I don't think Notre Dame wasn't on James Franklin. It wasn't. It really felt like, honestly, Kotelnicki and James Franklin came in with a great game plan. It felt like they did everything they could. The execution wasn't there. And now that was partially on the defense. Obviously, towards the end there, giving up that touchdown, it was hard to kind of swallow that one and be okay with that. But, I mean, the offense, the Nick Singleton flat route, that touchdown, instead of being up 7-0, we're up 3-0. That was a big difference. And then, like I said, obviously that final play where I feel like if you're James Franklin, there's no way you can get blamed for that, because if you as a coach feel, hey, I have a top 5 quarterback in college football and there's 40 seconds left and all you need is a field goal, you absolutely go for it. I've heard people say you just run the ball, but if you really feel like you got that guy, there's no way you just run it and just kind of concede overtime. And I think, we could say and if or but, I think we would have won in overtime against that Notre Dame team. I think we were better, but I just, everything I've seen up to this point, it really hasn't been, at least last year, to me, wasn't James Franklin's fault that we lost those big games. It was, obviously he has to shoulder the blame. When you are the head man, that's what you sign up for. You have to take the loss on your chin. But at the same time, like I said, it felt like a lot of those, we were in a good position. The execution really just wasn't there. So that's what leads me to believe that, yeah, James Franklin, it can be the year because we are the most veteran. We are the most talented. We have, you look around, and I think he is one of the better head coaches in college football. I think, comparing it to Ryan Day, you have to give Ryan Day the nod. Just I think it would be unfair to Ryan Day to call James Franklin a better head coach. I mean, Ryan Day's won every single head-to-head matchup and then won the Natty. But, you stack up Ohio State's coaching staff to ours, we're in a good place. I mean, yeah, we have a new coordinator this year, but he once again is the best. And you have Kotelnicki coming into year 2. Coach Franklin talked about that at Big Ten Media Day, saying, hey, now we can get into trigonometry with this offense. And hopefully not, actually. I don't know if many of the guys on the team can do trigonometry, but you could really start to kind of hone it in. And just to give you kind of a background into what it looks like is when you're coming into year 2 of an offense, when you go into spring ball and you go through install 1, 2, and 3, those base plays that you use, you go through that, and so does the defense. But then in the summer, where in Kotelnicki's year 1, you go through install 1, 2, and 3 again, and you have to really drive that home of what the plays are, what is our identity. Well, now in year 2, you can go into the summer after doing 1, 2, and 3 in the spring, and now it's, hey, we're going into 4, 5, and 6 install because you can do that. The defense, for example, this year, they have to go through 1, 2, and 3 again, and then they can sprinkle in a little bit more towards the end of camp. But it's just you're so much more comfortable, and everybody knows what you were trying to do, what you're trying to execute. So I think, look at that. Like I said, we have the best coordinator combo. You have position coaches across the board that I think are the best position coaches at their position across college football. So once again, I keep coming back to it, but like, if not now, when? I mean, I feel like if we don't get it done this year, anything short of being in the game, if you go to the game and you're at least playing in it, and let's just say you lose specific ways, I mean, it'd be a heartbreaker, but that is what it is. But if you don't get to the game, if you're James Franklin, this season is a disappointment.
I definitely think, going off what you said about Kotelnicki and Nolls, I think the good thing with Jim Nolls being in year 1 is that a lot of the guys on defense are veterans. They're smart. It's going to be a little easier to implement that. I mean, obviously, like you said, Denai, Rojas, a bunch of people in spring ball. Yeah. But I think what's good is that a lot of them are experienced. A lot of them are smart football players. And I think a lot of them will be able to pick up Nolls' defense as the time goes on. I also think they might not have been playing, but they were still around, everything, watching it all happen. And I think they're, like I said, they're smart football players. They're picking up on that. They're watching all that. And I also want to bring up another guy that we haven't mentioned today, A.J. Harris. I think Penn State, has had a bunch of great cornerbacks, a bunch of great safeties, but they never really had a true, they've never had a first-round pick as a defensive back. And it's looking like A.J. Harris might be the first. I mean, PFF had him as the number 1 2026 NFL draft cornerback. I think he is going to be a lockdown corner this year. He was on the watch list for the Nagurski Award, which is given to the best player, best defensive player in college football. That's a really high honor, even though it's just the watch list. So I think he's going to be really vital going forward, too, alongside Zakee Lee and Dejon Lane, who's entering year 2, and all of those guys. So I think it's going to be interesting to see how Nolls' defense looks in year 1, obviously, but I think he's lucky he gets a lot of veteran guys that can really pick this up fast. And then paired with year 2 under Andy Kotelnicki, it's just going to be really interesting to see how that all melts together. But I think it's all going to melt together very well.
Yeah, I think. Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, my only issue with the whole will A.J. Harris become the first round pick at cornerback is we kind of said that about Joey Porter Jr. Didn't work out, even though he technically kind of was picked 32 was at that year, because the Dolphins' first round pick obviously got a what's the word yeah.
I don't even know the word. I guess it was taken away from him.
Yeah. So my only hesitancy on asking questions about will A.J. Harris be the first round corner Penn State's ever had is we said that about Joey Porter Jr., who, even though he kind of technically was picked 32, but that was that year, that was in the second round, so didn't count. Then we also kind of said that about Kalen King, but then he kind of
fell off
a little bit.
But in the preseason, I think it was tabbed a second team All-American by Walter Camp in the preseason ahead of 2023. So there was a little bit of talk, but it's like now, I mean, I guess maybe third time's the charm, but it's like, I mean, AJ Harris, I think he should be set up well to have a good season, but we'll see about the draft.
Yeah, I think you look at the cornerback room too, and you look across from him. Davian Collins is someone too that is going to be really good. I mean, I've seen photos. He's running high 4.2s, and I've heard that from NFL scouts. I mean, people are really excited about him. James Franklin talked about also the battle for a cornerback two between him and Elliott Washington. So Elliott Washington, someone also to kind of look out for, someone that I've seen bench over 400 pounds and then go out and run a 4.3. So just a freak when it comes to numbers and just his strength and speed. So I think you're right. This is kind of one of the first times where we're in a really good place at cornerback. I mean, it felt like that 2022 season, it was pretty good with Joey and Kalen, but I think it could even be better this year. And I think it has to be to an extent. I think one of the storylines that you look at is the lack of depth on defense. And you start to look across the defensive line specifically. And it's kind of like, man, if we lose one of these guys, Dennis Sutton or Zane Durant, knock on wood, we're in a really, really bad place because defensive end, it's like, all right, we got Zariah Fisher, kind of unproven, but still a guy that is a veteran, 6th-year dude, and can, or 5th year, and you know, coming off injuries and can kind of all put it together. I mean, I practiced against him for years and years, and he was very talented, but could never just get on the field. Now we finally get to see him this year, and it was thought that Max Granville was going to be that dude. I mean, he looked massive. Goes home, gets injured, and is probably going to miss the entire year. So now you start to look, and it's like, all right, who's behind that? You know, you got some guys, Jalen Harvey, distant cousin of Chop Robinson, also wears that 44, kind of looks like him a little bit out on the field. I think that could be good. The one thing I will say is Jalen Harvey is a little bit smaller, a little bit more of that speed rusher. And when you do look at Zariah Fisher and Dennis Sutton, those are both bigger guys. And, you know, that is kind of the new prototype. If you look around at Chop Robinson, Abdul Carter, just kind of around everywhere, the new prototype is a defensive end that isn't 6'5", 6'6", and 275 pounds like Dennis Sutton. And it's more that, yeah, we want kind of a 6'2", 6'3" guy that has that twitchy burst off the line and can bend around that offensive tackle. And that's kind of what you see in some of these other depth pieces at defensive end. So I'm curious to see who's going to step up there. Defensive tackle, you know, you have Zane Durant, you have Alonzo Ford, who was playing at a very high level, but suffered a season-ending injury against Minnesota. And how is he going to come back from that? Is he going to be fully healthy? And I think sometimes it's easy to just kind of pencil in, yeah, he's going to be back to playing the same way he was. But it doesn't always happen that way. I mean, he had to spend the past, 6 months, 7 months rehabbing and getting back to where he was instead of going from where he was to getting better. So, you look at that, and then there's a lot of unproven talent, defensive tackle depth-wise. So that, there's also a couple questions, I guess, at linebacker. You just look at, Tony was kind of on and off last year. Like I said, had the injury, fixed it with surgery. So can he finally break out? And I think he was probably everybody's star breakout pick for last year, and it didn't happen. And it was kind of like, what the heck? Like, where's Tony Rojas? And so now I think there's a lot of expectations for him this year, and it looks like he's going to play that one will backer, and then, who's going to start at Mike linebacker? It's probably going to be Dom DeLuca in his 5th year. Very few people have ever been a third-time captain in James Franklin era. I think him, Sean Clifford, and maybe one other person have done it. So Jonathan Sutherland, yeah. Yep. And there's probably maybe one other person earlier on in the 2010s, but hasn't happened a ton. So, you look around and it's like you got to bring Amari Campbell in, a guy that was, very productive at UNC, but he's a young guy. He's going into year 3 now, and he ran that UNC defense. He wore the green dot, meaning, he communicated with the defensive coordinator. So, do we want him to run the defense? Do we want Dom DeLuca to run it? So there's definitely some position battles going on throughout camp that, not only do we have guys adjusting to a new defense, but I think across defense as a whole, and there's some on offense as well, but there's a lot of position battles that we're kind of going on right now as we speak.
Yeah, I think the interesting thing with Ford is the next man up seems to be Xavier Gilliam, who I know at Pro Day, Devontae Thomas was super high on him, was hyping him up. So it's just going to be interesting to see if Ford is, I think it was reported he's going to be cleared to practice in August. So that's, almost basically 30 days to get ready. That's not a ton of time. He's also learning a whole new defense, obviously, with Nolls. So it's gonna be interesting to see how he's recovered, how he looks during fall camp, and if Xavier Gilliam, how much he's gonna play, if Ford's really gonna truly be that starter. And then also you mentioned linebackers. I think it would be interesting if they choose to start Dom at the mic, just because he usually plays that will, and it would be interesting to like move him out of position. I think him and Rojas, I could see them splitting time. Maybe Dom plays the mic sometimes, but I think Mourar Campbell is probably going to play the mic most of the time. I think it's going to be. I think the three of them are just going to be in like a rotation with Anthony Specka getting some time too. Just going to be something like that. But the linebacker is definitely going to be very interesting to see how it looks come week 1, and who's getting that time eventually when there's some blowouts the first 3 weeks of the season. But yeah, it's definitely going to be a great season for Penn State, based on paper, just looking at it on paper. But obviously, you can't always go off of that. But just preseason, fall camp's getting underway. It's going to be interesting to see how all of that looks as we enter week 1 against Nevada.
Yeah, I'm excited. It's gonna be fun. First 3 games at Beaver Stadium is always good. Everybody can enjoy, relax. I will say Nevada, FIU, and Villanova. I don't think any of those 3 are even close to Bowling Green. I think everybody's kind of scared from last year. Bowling Green was like the best team in the MAC, and they had some NFL talent. Look at a Nevada. They were bottom of the Mountain West. I don't think they won a single game in the Mountain West. I don't think they had for 2 years. They are not good. FIU, I don't even know what league they're in, but they're not good. And we know what happened last time Villanova came here. I think we had to bring out the stretcher on a kick return in 2021. I remember that. So, saying all that to say, I think we're going to be fine, and I think we're going to get to see a lot of the young guys. And I guess one last thing too is quarterback 2, and really is quarterback 1 in 2026. I think that's a battle to watch out for. I think outside of the wide receivers, those first 3 games and kind of getting that going, that's going to be one of the biggest headlines, is watching Ethan Grunkemeyer and Jackson Smolik go at it. It felt like Ethan Grunkemeyer had it, and it was like, yeah, it was already gifted to him. Everybody was kind of writing Jackson Smolik's name in the transfer portal already for him, me included. And this dude battled back in the spring ball and said, hold on, I got something to say. And I think that says a lot about Jackson Smolik, considering just what he went through with an injury, getting buried on the depth chart, and saying, no, I'm going to keep battling. I'm not going to quit. I'm going to do this thing right. And a lot of people said he played better than Ethan Grunkemeyer in the spring, played better in the spring game for sure. And just being frank, he's less talented as far as arm talent. Ethan Grunkemeyer is one of the most talented passers I've seen. We've heard that from Brad Mendler, who is the Drew Aller's trainer and Ethan Grunkemeyer's trainer, and Jackson Smolik still finding a way. So I think that's a position battle to kind of keep an eye on.
Yeah, for sure. I think Smolik was the QB3 before he got hurt last spring. And so I think that's definitely really interesting. You get injured, and then Grunkemeyer obviously kind of steps up, is the backup quarterback for the entire playoff run with Pribula's transfer. So it's just going to be interesting to see how that shapes out. I think Franklin said many, many times it's been super competitive, and it's not going to be short away until pretty much week 1. So it's going to be really interesting to see if it changes throughout the season as well. I mean, obviously things can always change. Someone could get hurt, everything like that. So, it's going to be interesting to see how that plays out as well.
Yeah, I mean, Jackson Smolik, I think we've only seen him on the field like once against Delaware in 2023. I think he had like one handoff and then went off the field. and then Grunkemeyer, I mean, obviously he was on the field for the SMU, but only played very limited garbage time snaps. So these 3 games are assuming there's going to be a blowout. I mean, I guess you never know, but it should be blowouts. We should see both of them get some action in.
Yeah, I'm excited. I think, throughout camp, I was there when Christian Veilleux and Drew Aller had to battle out for QB2 back in 2022. So it's interesting to kind of, know how that goes down. They're charting every single pass that leaves their hand. There's going to be a lot of judgment of, and I think they're going to feel that pressure. I mean, it's one of those, pressure makes diamonds is what they say. So let's see who comes out on top. And I think we will know probably after the, going to the bye week. I think we're going to cement who's going to be that true QB2 going into the bye week or coming out of the bye week going into Oregon, and say, hey, this is our guy if something happens to Drew Aller. So, yeah, excited to see how that kind of goes down. Like I said, I view Grunkemeyer as the more talented guy, but maybe hasn't proven himself as much through an interception because he threw the ball a little high to Trey Wallace and it popped up. And now Jackson Smolik has, like I said, kind of proven that leadership, that being able to fight back and kind of win the respect of his teammates. So there's both sides of the coin for both of those guys. And, yeah, it's going to be interesting to watch those first 3 games. I think my prediction is I think James Franklin's going to play them both fairly equally. I think whoever is labeled quarterback 2 on the depth chart is going to go in first against Nevada. And just knowing James Franklin, I feel like then going to FIU, as soon as Drew goes out, he's going to put the other guy in that didn't get to go first because he's a very fair guy. So that's kind of how I see that playing out, and they're just going to let him go at it. And I think unless there is a huge separation during camp, it's going to go back or forth for whoever it is who really plays well in all 3 games collectively.
Thank you for watching the 1-0 podcast. For more football coverage, you can find us at psucollegian.com and follow us on socials.